How do we deal with miscommunication and stressors? I believe it's important that we as students try to come to an answer in regards to that question because as students, now that we have midterms and now that the pandemic is occurring, we have a lot of things that are contributing to the stress and issues in our lives. But one thing I tend to see people do, my age group and on the campus, is avoid their issues. This means that they take the avoidance communication style. And when I say avoidance, I mean they tend to put off confronting their issues and they tend to all around just avoid their stressors. Now, this may seem like an easy and quick communication method to deal with, straight to the point. You avoid your problem, you just ignore it. It may seem like that, but it does more harm than good. And the reason that it does more harm than good is because you're not only hurting yourself in the process, you slowly start to become a more passive person. You're also hurting those around you, the people that you have relationships with. And lastly, because the problem is never really going to disappear if you keep on avoiding it. For my first point, when I say that having the avoidance communication style can hurt yourself, I mean that you can slowly become a more passive person. And when people see passive people, they tend to sort of treat them like rugs. They walk all over them. Let's, for instance, you might see yourself becoming slowly more and more passive and more willing to just avoid all your problems and all people who are contributing to them. It seems very easy to just say, okay, I'm not going to deal with it. I'm just going to avoid that person or I'm just going to ignore that problem. But you're slowly sort of giving into them. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be giving into, you're just slowly giving into allowing these problems to take over you. When I say passive, I mean passive people just tend to go with the flow. They don't really express themselves. Oftentimes, when they have a confrontation or a problem, they just try their best to ignore the confrontation or they just don't really speak their true feelings with that. And no one wants to be a passive person. We want to be assertive. We want to be able to reach compromises when it comes to communicating with people. So it's so important that people try to avoid the avoidance style of communication. It's a bit ironic in itself, avoiding the avoidance communication style, but it's just very important to keep that message in your head. My second point as to why people need to try to steer away from the avoidance communication style is because it hurts those around you. When I say hurt those around you, I truly do mean it. We are humans and we are young adolescents, so we really value the relationships around us, not just romantic wise or familiar wise. We also have friends and different people in our lives that we have relationships with, like professors or maybe organizations. When I say it hurts those around you, let's just say it. If you have an issue with someone, avoiding that person is only going to cause more rift in your relationship with that person. It's only going to cause more tension. I know it's easier said than done, and sometimes it can be very painful to have a miscommunication error with someone you care about, or disagreement with someone that you communicate with on a day-to-day basis. But let's just say, for instance, if you use the avoidance communication style, you just completely avoid that person. That's going to mess up that relationship you have with that person, because not only may they feel a little bit disrespected that you suddenly started avoiding them, they also might just feel like you don't really care about the friendship or the relationship. Avoiding that person is not going to make the problem disappear, and avoiding that person will more than likely just cause a big divide in your relationship. Sometimes it's easier and just much more safer to avoid someone in our heads, but in reality that can really screw over the relationship we have with that person. So, and they might feel like we're ignoring them. For instance, if you and your best friend were to get into an argument and your best friend just completely avoided you after that, you'd feel terrible. I think it's important that we realize that's just very awkward for both sides, and it's very hard to sometimes avoid someone that you might see every single day. So when I say that the avoidance communication style doesn't just hurt us, I mean it hurts those around us. It can ruin and fracture our relationships, and some wounds can't heal. Even if per se your friend never brings up that argument, that rift is still always going to be there. It's hard to recover from it. So I think it's important that we avoid the avoidance communication style for not just ourselves, but also for our relationships with others. Lastly, the last reason that I believe that we should avoid the avoidance communication style is because the problem is never going to truly disappear. When I say this, I really do mean that avoiding the problem or avoiding your stressor is never going to make it disappear. It's important that you confront it head on. To put it into perspective, let's say, for instance, there's a classroom or a professor that you're confused in. If you avoid that professor, if you avoid that class in general, that seems like a temporary getaway. You're probably feeling good at the moment, but in reality, you've just done more harm than good, because while you have done none of the work or you turned up for none of the classes, now you have to deal with late assignments and your grade deteriorating. So, when I say that we should try to avoid and try to distract ourselves from doing the avoidance communication style, I mean that because while it's easy to step away from our issues, it takes much more guts and it helps us develop as people. We confront our problems straight up. So, thank you for tuning into our presentation. And remember, stop avoiding your issues and please be willing to compromise. Be assertive in your issues and don't avoid your stressors. Take them on. It's important.